Hello everyone, welcome again to MEF CONNECTS WHOLESALE and to the opening of our anti-fraud security discussions. And we're doing it with the bank. I'm very happy to say that we have some of the best known association coming and joining us today to look at how everything is going, a bit of a review on the threats out there and the status in the market. Let me invite one by one to appear, and in no particular order. We have Anurag Aggarwal from i3 Forum, Katia Gonzalez from the i3 Forum. We have James Williams, strangely enough, not been presenting today, but he will be representing MEF instead. Jussi, Makela, Global Leaders Forum, and Michiel Huisamen from WASPA. All of you. Thanks for taking part, and today I'll try to be your impartial and serious host here, because we're talking about something very serious, that is which is part of the future for this market, and equally it impacts the commercial relationship, some of the players, and eventually you could even say some of the customers out there, the enterprises, but also the end customers. So lots to talk about, but again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you all to come and bring your expertise. I also introduce you with your association names, but you can see there from the screen that so many of you also represent their own companies. So Katia is from Bix and Anurag is from Tanla. So thanks for, and I should say also Michiel and himself. Okay, so we will start probably having a bit of a summary of everything happening out there. If you don't mind, I have some questions for you, but to everybody, and we heard of task Isabel Paradi also to come up with a question, but to everybody out there, please, Q&A, the tab out there, let me know your questions and we'll ask as soon as possible. Okay, now first of all, talk about the fight with fraudsters, and this is not an easy one. It's been a continuous battle, and one which says continuous changes and firefighting, sometimes a bit of strategic planning as well. But let's start and take the temperature on possibly what wholesale is really famous and based on at one point, which is voice and voice fraud. And I think that's what I'd like to ask the i3 Forum and Katia. Hi, Katia.
Hey, hello. Really a pleasure to be here. As you say, good representation from most of the organizations dealing with fraud right now. So to start with this, it's difficult. So I think the main keyword I would say is evolution and change. We can certainly see a very big difference in how we were dealing with fraud 7 years ago, even 5 years ago, and now. So there have been major changes in how fraud happens, the shape of the attacks, much more aggressive, much faster. A lot of focus is growing on acquiring personal data. And that's quite of a new trend, I think. Previously, it was about getting money through international transactions or voice transactions in general. Now, even through voice, they try to focus more on acquiring data. I'm not saying, and that brings eventually probably much more money and it's a little bit more difficult to grab, because they attack subscribers rather than attacking the funds of companies and operators. It has also grown much more global. There's globalization that we talk about in everything is also getting into fraud. And how, I mean, why do I say globalization? First of all, because we see that there all geographies at some point in time suffer from the same trend. It may, I mean, kind of attacks may start in some country, region, some kind of player, but at the end it spreads and evolves and tends to have a global effect. We also see that the players that are affected have changed. So in the past, we were only talking about operators. Now we see that subscribers are more and more subject to attacks, direct attacks, and also enterprises. That's, I think, again, a different shift and twist in the frauds. And last, I think that the attacks are becoming omni-channel. We are the ones making artificial differences in saying there is fraud on voice or fraud on SMS or fraud on data or security breaches. Eventually, the fraudsters, they just work on what works best. And we see that the attacks happen in parallel on all these services. So if we want to be more effective ourselves, we should start working, talking, and dealing with fraud as a whole, and not just building small silos, because in our companies, that's how we have been working over time. I think we need to evolve in the same way that fraud is evolving.
Well, very good. I like the mention of the omni-channel fraud. That is so true. It's not easy to compartmentalize. Unfortunately, they seem to be better omni-channel than some of us as well. So we need to learn a bit more. Let's talk to James. And James, you represent MEF here. MEF is working on the, let's say, on the messaging side a lot. But you also have we also have consumer surveys. We check with users. Can you share a bit on what's happening from the consumer point of view? Are they saying things are getting better or not?
I can indeed. So MEF, every year we go out to 6,500 smartphone users around the world. That's 650 users in 10 different geographies. We've got Brazil, China, France, Germany, India, Japan, South Africa, Spain, UK, and the USA. So super, super comprehensive research. And the latest research on the consumer trust side of things has actually shown, I find that it's not what you'd expect given what Katia has outlined, but actually consumers are feeling a little bit more comfortable when it comes to generally to the fraud side of things. But that said, here at MEF, we're famous for our other surveys and reports. We've had business messaging surveys and reports. And actually, we're seeing there's been a massive increase in SMS phishing, in smishing attacks. And as Katia mentioned, it's really all about securing the personal data of individual and organizations. And indeed, this whole concept of frauds being in silos, whether it be SMS or voice or IoT or anything else, you've got to shatter that myth. And it truly is cross-channel, omni-channel. But at the end of the day, the key thing that has changed is, and we're seeing this in all the metrics from the reports we have within MEF, and indeed hearing from all our members, is that the number of messaging transactions, for example, has increased dramatically. Digital transformation is real, and it's bringing a whole new batch of people to the market who are potentially fantastic victims, shall we say, from the bad actors. And it's a new subset of bad actors that has come to the market, and these are the true cybersecurity experts. So rather than hacking the defense systems of a government or something like that, they're actually finding they can make more money from hacking individuals or companies in a far faster way. So there is a far more attention brought to, for example, voice and messaging than ever before. So it's even more important we as an industry collaborate to do all we can to put a lid on this.
Well, it's interesting what you say. Maybe we need to analyze it later on a bit more, but the consumers are probably getting a bit more used, as I suspect, to the threat, and they probably less, concerned. I should say they're still very much concerned, but less worried about not knowing what's happening out there. But if you're in UK, and I can see that many people are not from UK, Australia, Nigeria, India, but today's The Times of London opens up with its main article being about identity fraud in telecom and in finance, and I think and showing how that is a massive concern. So definitely the problem is there and getting more concern. Users are getting, well, if you want to say, a bit more used not to use our services. Our message from the industry sometimes is don't click, don't call, don't answer, which is very, very disappointing for an industry who makes money from the interactions we deliver. But let's see, maybe there is some positive light, some good news. Jussi and Anurag, you both are working through the GLF, and I should say maybe Anurag as well as part of Tandla, on solutions for the industry as well. Could you give us a bit of a status on what's happening out there? Is blockchain helping? Is something out there helping us? Jussi, I mean, maybe you can start from what GLF has done.
Sure, absolutely. So thank you, Dario, for having me. First of all, here it's great to be on the panel today. So absolutely, I think a technology is going to be a significant part of the answer and tool, not obviously the only tool. There's going to be behavioral issues, of course, but there are certain technological advancements, and blockchain is one of them. And from the GLF, we've been looking at, there was a working group specifically focusing on blockchain, not just focusing on fraud, but generally how do we automate the various business processes that exist among different organizations. That working group actually resulted in us launching what's called the Communication Business Automation Network, or CBAN, which has its own governance, own set of membership, own funding, and all of that, who are continuing and who are developing the approach for a decentralized automation amongst all sorts of different use cases. So not just fraud, but also settlement use cases, automatic provisioning and all that. But specifically why it's important in fraud, and this is what we found out when we did a couple of POCs a couple of years ago, is that obviously what blockchain enables us to do is to basically track the movement of traffic whilst not necessarily revealing all the credentials, because one of the issues with fraud, if we just think about voice fraud, is that there's a link, so bilateral links of a series. So often those who terminate calls don't know where it originated, and vice versa. Through blockchain, potentially, and definitely the technology enables us to do to provide us with the visibility. So a terminator, if let's say OBR fraud, I know that as a terminator inside EU, for instance, I know that call were originated in the EU rather than outside of the EU, and so forth. And that is the sort of the idea where the blockchain becomes, so where the sort of distributed ledger, and the fact that you have immutable record of CDRs originating in some place and ending up in other place, and that's very promising. And from the CBAN perspective, there is a big rush to get into production in the first fraud mitigation application that's kind of based on the reference architecture over the course of this year, or early part of next year. And that is potentially very, very exciting, because it can address huge amounts of these sort of issues that are purely, it's an opportunity for fraudsters simply because there is no visibility through the chain at the moment in the industry. So that could definitely provide a future relief, or at least eradicate certain types of fraud. So hopefully that is something we are able to bring to the market, for everyone's sake, relatively soon.
Well, that is good news, and so we'll come back and ask what's the development happening. And Anurag, as I said before, you represented the IFRI Forum here for the messaging side, and also you're working on different perspectives in the industry as well. My question to you as well, bring us some good news now.
For Dario and everyone, thanks for having me here. Dario, before I answer, there's a pretty interesting question by Isabella, and it sort of will be a logical part of what I answer. Would you want to just read that out first, and Katia and I can take the voice and the messaging angles in that, and I can answer your part as well.
I was gonna keep the nasty question from Isabel. Well done, Isabel, by the way. You promised and you delivered. But let's do it. Let's do it now if you want. Why not? Everything is perfectly happy. So maybe you can say a couple of words, and then Katia can follow on some comments as well. I'll read it out if you want. That's my job. That's what I got paid for. I forgot. So here it is. The question, as promised from Isabel, a large number of carriers are generating fraud traffic themselves. Some say that up to 40% is fraud traffic. Is fake. The same trend is happening in the messaging business. Isabella says, Isabel, isn't it time for the wholesale business to start addressing these more seriously and deal with the elephant in the room? Is it?
Right. Thanks, Dario, and thanks, Isabel. Yeah, you made our lives tough as expected. Even when you're not on the panel, you're still around. So, I represent the messaging fraud work group at the I3 Forum. We are a set of carriers and some other players from the industry who focus on discussing, sharing best practices, and finding suitable ways for combating different types of fraud. As Katia very well mentioned, today fraud has become omni-channel in nature, and hence one cannot have a segregated uni-channel approach. It can't be siloed. It has to be an all-encompassing approach. So we discuss a lot of those things. And coming on to what Isabel is saying about a lot of fraud traffic being generated, yes, I can't comment on the voice side. I'll leave that to Katia. But on the messaging side, 40% does seem a little too high, I would say. Yes, we see cases of carriers, especially not meaning to name and shame, but like we see a lot of MVNOs having some very high termination rates and revenue sharing agreements, who bring some of this traffic into their own networks, and then the entire chain has to pay for it. Now, what's coming out are new forms of technology which help combat the basic issue which is there in messaging and voice. You cannot trace beyond the first leg that you're receiving from and the first leg that you're sending to. You don't know the originator. Often you don't know who's the handling party at the last mile connectivity. What's needed is something like a single source of truth, so that all the way from the originator enterprise, I'm just talking A to P here, so all the way from the enterprise, all the way up till the end operator and the end subscriber, there is a single source of truth, and nothing can go against that. If you look at blockchain today, that's the perfect solution for this, because that rides on the concept of having a blockchain technology that is shared across multiple users, multiple people in the ecosystem, and there is no way to corrupt, at least to my best of knowledge, there is no way to corrupt the veracity of a blockchain data information which is stored. From that point of view, for example, Tanla, in Tanla we've launched a platform called Wisely in association with Microsoft that focuses on offering end-to-end encryption and a single source of truth right from the originator till the end operator. You could have intermediaries also as part of the entire ecosystem, but finally everybody shares the same bits of data. So there is really no scope anymore of having any fraudulent traffic generated, because it can all be tracked, it can all be detected. So I feel that new age problems require new age solutions. And I think that these problems that we are seeing often, I've attended some of these sessions in the GSMA messaging fraud work group as well, which is started a couple of months ago. There also we've seen a number of people come up and show applications which work on a rev share model and use the P2P channel to generate A2P traffic, and then have the intermediaries pay for it. So yes, some of these fraudulent approaches are starting to become more prominent. I always say hats off to the fraudster. They are the most innovative people amongst all of us, and we have to keep catching up with them. But definitely, I think these new technologies such as blockchain that are coming about should help address these adequately until more use cases come up and more developments are done in this direction. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Katia, as promised, would you like to comment on the question as well?
Yes, thank you so much, Isabel. Easy question. Look, I believe there are many different angles to take this. So it is true. There's still, I believe, and this is my personal belief, that there's still a big portion of the market. There are a lot of parties out there that live mainly on fraud or on fake traffic. There are a few issues in the ecosystem as it is that allow for this. Yeah, it's not only specific parties that just wish to do fraud or facilitate fraud. So there's a very high focus on reducing costs. So like everything in life, quality has a price. And when you see something, a route, a termination rate, or a deal that is too good to be true, in general, there's a reason for it to be so good. So when you want quality, when you want fraud-free interconnections, in general, connectivity and services, there's a price for it. So at BIGS, we spend a lot of time, money, and effort in building a fraud-free ecosystem, and the same for all the other i3 Forum members. We spend time, we implement processes and systems, and it costs money. So technology, as Jussi was saying, is an important layer to fraud protection and fraud prevention, but it has a cost, and it entails a number of things like a price. Then there's also something very important that we haven't mentioned here before, and I think lacks sometimes in the discussions around fraud and security, which is the ethics. And the ethics is something that is terribly important. I would say at i3 Forum, I mean, when we do that role, we do it, I mean, we're not paid for it. We're a non-for-profit organization. So we really do it because we believe that the ecosystem has a way to exist and to be healthy without fraud. And the ethics means also that companies at some point need to be aware on who they are working with and choose who are the right partners to deliver the value they want to deliver to their peers, to their customers, and to the role they want to play in the ecosystem. So I think that is key. But you're right, we should in general be more conscious on how we do business, put the necessary layers in place, the ethics, the technology, the investment in knowledge, in participating in and collaborating in the industry to make things right, because I think that is important at some point.
Thank you. Let me ask the same questions, and I will give the voice to Jussi very, very quickly. But I wanted to introduce Michiel Huisamen, which is here from WASPA, representing the wholesale portfolio of WASPA. If you don't know WASPA, you should know that in South Africa, that's the institution, I should say, the Wireless Application Service Provider Association, that it really is self-regulating, I should say, even the market in so many aspects. Michiel, thanks for joining us from Connect Mobile Communication, and here representing WASPA as well. You have a view from South Africa, which is an in-depth, and I'd like to see whether you can comment on some of these, including the questions about how much fraud is there and whether it's getting better.
Hi, Dario, and thank you very much for having me. You know, from South Africa's point of, there's a lot. You know, we do see more on the smishing side, the fraud aspect. I think that will never go away. The concept of the criminal intent to get your personal information, especially in countries like South Africa, is high. So with all the other panelists, the discussions that they've had, we fully agree. We don't see that much regarding Isabel's question, I believe, from a carrier side, that high, but it is definitely there. We also do feel like Katia has mentioned, that the collaboration of ethics and technology and just partnerships with various industry experts to combat this will definitely have a positive impact. You know, we at WASPA and even our members, we have a very strict code of conduct that we enforce, and we are very, very active in that aspect. So it's definitely and we're trying our best.
And thanks, Michiel. So we've seen it is an international element with different variations. So let's look at the international view from a GLF as well. Jussi, can you comment on that as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the things, and it's a sort of interesting question around the role of the carriers play, and this is what we see quite a lot in terms of the difference between sometimes of a commitment of the carriers, especially even some of the large name ones versus like what's actually the behavior might be in the market. So one of the key things that comes up from our members and from our fraud surveys, we've been doing one for every year for the past few years, but one of the items as well is the incentive structure. So Katia talked about ethics, which is absolutely right, and nobody wants to do something unethical or support organized crime. But at the same time, if you have, for instance, you're still incentivizing sales teams for generating sales, that's what they are going to do. And it gives a very easy, especially if you also, when the numbers are not looking quite right towards the end of the year, that's, when, often people tend to look the other way. And so there's also a kind of organizational like ethics talking about it one day, but it's also about, okay, how do we structure, how do carriers and any CPS, the communication service provider, CSP, is going to structure also their own internal incentive structures to ensure that it is not that we are investing in fraud mitigation and talking about on one hand, and at the same time we might have broken a sales model that actually supports and sustains and allows these backdoors to remain open for the fraudsters.
Well, thanks, Jussi. And I know we have about probably, I believe, 10 minutes left. It's time to remind everybody of a bit of a challenge that I wrote on my LinkedIn comment one point, saying, if you have questions, if you want to complain about some of us, the trade association not doing enough, let it be known. And here it is in your Q&A. You can write some of those questions. Be nice, please. But truth is always good. If you don't write anything, it means that they are doing a fantastic job, and they should go, free from these and knowing that they're doing all the good stuff. So please let me have your questions. But just to turn the tables around, how would you mark yourself? And how would you judge the amount of work done by your associations, but the industry overall in terms of fighting the fraud in the market? I'll start with James, that has been quiet right now, representing MEF. How would you mark the industry, James? James,
mark the industry as a whole, and then mark MEF. I think you were. That's what you were looking for, Dario.
I'm
being dangerous here. I'm being dangerous.
Stop you there.
No. Okay, so the industry as a whole, I would say 5.5 out of 10. I'm talking about industry as a whole, not trade associations, because if you're looking at the trade associations here, we cooperate strongly. We do absolutely everything we can. But it's very, very clear, again, just from looking at surveys and reports around and about, for example, MEF, every year, we have our A to P SMS security reports. And we have had that again. And we had the webinar, which was the absolute culmination of the presentation of that report coming through. And there's still so many, for example, mobile network operators that don't have an SMS firewall in place. Then there are even more mobile network operators around the world I know that don't have a signaling firewall in place. But it's not all about the mobile network operators. It's about the messaging companies, the voice carriers, all have to have, for example, these firewalls in place with managed services. So every single stakeholder has a role to play, down to actually the consumer. So you look at what MEF is doing with the SMS Sender ID registry program here in the UK, with the 7726 scheme, which allows subscribers to actually report spam. And if subscribers don't report spam, then that doesn't help the industry. So everyone absolutely has a role to play. A lot more needs to be done. And within MEF, we are member-led, and I would give our MEF members a straight 7.5 to 8 for all the work that is being done. We can never rest on our laurels. There is a ton to be done, but at the end of the day, we've all got to remember there are consumers, and everything we do is about maintaining that consumer trust. That's the only way we can grow our business.
Sure people should be starting reviewing that right now. Send us emails, be gentle. But same question then, I will ask to Katia now. Katia from iFree Forum and BIX.
Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit nicer to the industry than James. But still, I mean, I'd go for 6. Just because I see that there is a lot of momentum in collaboration. I believe that another key part in this collaboration that our regulators are starting to take that role up and understand that they need to also consider operators, enterprises that are often forgotten, and vendors also into the whole equation. But I think we have a lot to do, there's still a lot of growth that we can have to make it better. There's a lack of homogeneity in the industry. Across geographies, the situation's not the same. We see that some regions are not yet there. And again, as I said in the beginning, because fraud is global, when you have big loopholes like we still have now, well, that jeopardizes the whole efforts that some of us are making. So we have a lot to do yet. We are in the good direction, I think. Now, for the i3 Forum voice, I would go for 8.5 to 9. Why? Because we have been working really a lot for the past years, 10 years, 12 years, no, 12 years, I think we've been working on this now. We used to be preaching in a desert in the beginning, but it's picking up, and that's very encouraging. Now, the problem is that we do not have as many members as we would like to. So we want to have more of you there. So do not hesitate to come and join us at the SMS fraud group with Anurag, at the voice fraud group with me. We welcome everybody. We are active. We want to help the community. And that is, I think, the main thing. Why I give us a 9, because we have been really fighting for so many years that I think the group deserves it.
Well done, and well done on the 9, and no comments so far on the 7.5 from James, or the 9, or the 5 and 6 for the industry. I think, but definitely lots of things are happening in the industry. I would like to ask Jussi as well. Oh, I just seen that as magically as I mentioned it, Jussi disappeared. So yeah, it's back.
You think I'm back? Am I?
You're back.
But I missed the question. Sorry, Dario.
So the question would be, how would you rank and mark the industry and the GLS itself in terms of?
I think so. I think instead of saying what the ranking should it be 5.5 or should it be a 6 or 7 or something like that, what I would say is that I have seen that whatever the score is, it's improving. Over the past few years, we've seen that this is definitely. People are talking about fraud with more passion. We see a much more of a senior people involvement in the organizations. The old excuse that I didn't know that our organization is involved in fraud or facilitated in somehow doesn't hold anymore. I think people are also opening up. It's been fraud perhaps a little bit something that you don't openly discuss, but now there's going to be a much more sort of open in the industry. We are in fact going to launch. And our next fraud report in October, also a attestation process where the carriers who are signatories to the GLF Code of Conduct and also others actually publicly attest, and those will be announced who those are, who are deemed to be in compliance with the Code of Conduct. And we've asked for proof and evidence and all of that. And this is again showing that the industry actually wants to publicly make a much more sort of a stronger statement against the fraud. Obviously, we as organizations, GLF, we've played a big part of that, but ultimately we just reflect what our members want to do. We can't do necessarily that much better. We can't do necessarily that much worse, as long as we try and do and drive it forward to the best of the intentions of our members. That's all we can do. And in that, I think GLF, we've done a pretty good job. Same as I3 Forum, we work very closely on that. And I think that, overall, we can be reasonably pleased what we've achieved. And, but it's only sort of small steps forward, and there are many, many more to come.
Well, thanks, Jussi. And I think that there seems to be a list and alignment so far, and with the opinion we've heard of, there is a bit of momentum gathering, I would say. Then we heard it from Katia, we heard it from James and from Jussi now. There is one question, which is great news, is nobody's complaining about us guys. So I think we've done okay. Give it 5 more minutes. We'll see if anything happens. But we got one question here I'd like to ask to Anurag and Michiel instead, which is from Diego Tafuto. The question is, with the movement of some part of the traffic more and more versus OTT, so traffic moving to the OTT, are you not seeing any reduction of fraud on SMS messaging? So maybe, Michiel, can you tell us a bit more about this, and then Anurag after that?
From our side, we are definitely seeing a bit of a reduction as a few years ago. They were definitely much, much more. I think it's also part of consumer protection. Even just from a WASPA side, we've done a lot of PR on the consumer protection side. The public are getting very smarter and not as gullible in clicking on specific links and things like that, for instance. And I think that does create a bit of a reduction, because the smishing isn't as effective as it used to be. But what we are definitely seeing, though, is that they are getting definitely smarter. They're changing, they're using different content, not the usual things. And you would always get those guys that would click on the link. So they're definitely changing their approach, but I do believe it's less.
Well, thank you, Michiel. And Anurag, just to add a bit to that questions, there is a comment from Jose Garcia that says it would be good to clarify bypass versus fraud in terms of messaging. So first of all, tell us a bit more about the impact of OTT. Are you seeing some of the traffic moving away, some of the fraudulent traffic moving away?
So, it's like a zero-sum game as I see it. And in fact, it's worse, if you really ask me, because that effectively means that the fraud, again, quoting what Katia said very eloquently, that you can't have a uni-channel or a siloed approach. So in case if the traffic is moving from the conventional plain vanilla SMS to, say, WhatsApp, or nowadays Instagram is also becoming popular. So if that's happening, that just makes it that much more difficult for all players in the ecosystem, especially for the carrier. Let's call the carrier or the operator as the most trusted party in the entire ecosystem. If we, of course, the enterprise is the originator, but other than that, within the ecosystem, let's consider the operator being the most trusted party. It becomes that much more of a challenge for an operator to manage, because some of these channels are, as the name says, OTT. They really don't have an operator play out here. So that becomes challenging both for the enterprise and the operator who owns some of these subscribers. Hence, it's not a great news if traffic is moving and fraudulent traffic is reducing on SMS, because that same fraud is now happening in even more sharper formats and even less monitored via the new channels. So that's how I would look at it, because like an SMS, for example, you can have some levels of links, at best some URLs, and of course then the plain text. But in rich media channels, there's a lot more which can happen, and you can literally be sending files across which appear very innocuous in nature, but could be leading to some other challenges on the operator. And as everybody said, that nowadays fraudsters are targeting individuals rather than looking at the large companies. So as far as the question goes, yes, I agree that there must be some shift of fraud. But as I said, it's a zero-sum game. The total fraud is still the same. and rather it's worse in some shape and form. Coming to Jose's question about fraud and bypass, thank God I know the answer, as I believe I do. Fraud typically means when somebody is cheated in some form. And so if I take the example of this wonderful MEF Connects wholesale session that's happening, so in case somebody misrepresents himself and appears as somebody else, they are frauding, they're defrauding the MEF and all the participants through that mode. But suppose a genuine person joins this event for free. Suppose if it was a paid event, and suppose somebody finds a way to join this event for free, that would become a typical case of a bypass, which means that nobody has been frauded per se, but yes, there is a revenue loss for some party in the entire ecosystem. In this case, for example, it could be the MEF. That's what we are seeing happen today. And Jose is very right that often these terms are interchangeably used, and often they're confused, because what happens is that sometimes the tools, such as let's take the most basic, an SMS firewall, that combats both these aspects. It combats fraud also, and it combats bypass also. It's meant to avoid fraud. It's also meant to act as a monetization tool for operators. So from that perspective, both these terms often are used interchangeably. But yes, both are basically unethical or illegal in nature, and they're affecting some party in the entire ecosystem.
Okay, so and here is, I mean, I will also say, download the MEF. I'm doing some of James' work, definitions, but equally from Anurag, the iFree Forum, and from Katia, the iFree Forum, GLF. The definition of industry is very important to understand. But we talk a similar language, and we understand what is good or not. Sometimes a bit of a debate is always good. Take your pick, but make sure we understand what we talk to each other. Now, I do understand one thing, which is I am late. And my boss, Susan, will really complain about me about that. But it was too interesting, and I couldn't stop any of you. So apologies if you're waiting for the next sessions with James and Simeon. But it's all coming shortly, so we'll let James go in. But first, a big thank you to all the participants today and for playing along with me. So from myself to Jussi, to James, to Michiel, to Anurag, and to Katia, a big thank you. And overall, I will probably go and support the viewers. There is momentum. All of these organizations are doing a great work. Please go and check what the GLF, the iFree Forum, WASPA, and what MEF are doing, and the many other associations out there. And all the more, the merrier, I would say. But so far, nobody complained about you guys. So we seem to be doing scot-free. Well done. Congratulations. And I hope I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.